Welcome to Just Break Up, the podcast about love, heartbreak, and all the relationship advice you don't want to hear. My name is Sierra DeMulder.
And I'm Sam Blackwell. And this week, we're going to tackle topics like parental judgment, the wide world of grief, and fear of having missed out. But before we begin, we just want to give you our Surgeon General's warning. And maybe like a content warning as well. Sierra and I are not licensed mental health practitioners, and this episode is going to be all about parents. So if you are in a place where you don't want to listen to people's letters about their parents, like this is not your episode. Like this, and that is okay. Yeah. We're not offended if you're like...
It could be your episode like in a couple of weeks or a couple of years from now, you know, like... It's funny, of all the content we do, we try to give like content warnings, but I love that we both were like, man, an episode about parents is a lot. Like this is the one that we're going to preface first, you know?
Yeah, right.
Anyway, yes, this is all to say we are not professionals. We are not mental health therapists or counselors or any sort of accredited people. So please take the following episode as you see fit, or don't take it at all. Sam and I are just here to offer our humble musings to hopefully shed some understanding and maybe some laughs on the incredibly rewarding, but mostly confusing experience that is love. All right. So this week's check-in topic is not about parents.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a brief break from that. So we were asked recently to check in about red flags and like what the difference between a red flag and a deal breaker was. And it really made me start to think about how much like you and I have changed in our philosophies since we started this podcast, and B, about red flags as like as they're functioning in our society right now. I see so much content online about like, 30 red flags so you can immediately leave your boyfriend, or yellow flags, green flags, right. They've really become a part of our, cultural narrative about dating. And while I am here for that, because I think that we often don't empower ourselves to like, reject people or to say like, you're not for me, I wasn't taught to say like, no, thank you. That's a red flag as a young woman. And like, I love that we are teaching folks about stuff like this, or like, I guess, teaching folks about trusting their intuition. I also think that the conversation, like everything on Instagram, lacks nuance. And,
Sure.
I'm sure there are times that your and I's commentary about, about red flags, it lacked nuance too, because I think that red flags can be incredibly personal. They can be incredibly subjective to your own experience. And I thought we could just have a general conversation about red flags, because I don't think we have in a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I was younger, I thought red flags, or I found them very helpful, because I was really trying to understand like where my preferences and boundaries were, and like how I was going to allow people to treat me. And that can be super helpful to figure out, to say like, oh, I deserve somebody who texts me back, or like I really don't like it when somebody argues with me when they're drunk, or whatever it is, to like help figure out like, okay, these are the firm edges of what's acceptable behavior. And like, I spent a lot of time not knowing those edges, because I was somebody who was new to relationships, and like, it's really understandable that I didn't know what those edges were. And so having friends or other people be like, oh, here are some things that are really like no's for me, was like really helpful to be like, okay, well, maybe those are no's for me too. Right. But I do think that there is some, not necessarily wiggle room, but there's like nuance in sort of our understanding of red flags. And I'm never really a fan of like, these are hard and fast rules that apply to everyone. To be clear, like Sierra and I are not talking about like abusive red flags here, right? Like things around
let's name some of them.
Like abusive behavior around like controlling who you can be around and how you can be around those people, like looking at your phone and like asking you like inappropriate questions about who you're texting or
isolating you.
Right. Yeah. Like controlling your finances, not allowing you to spend the money in the way that is important to you, telling you that your family's all out to get you to, and it's just you against the world. Like these are things where it's like, no, those are indications of like controlling abusive behavior. And like, there's lots of websites available to look through some of those things. And like, I firmly ascribe to all of them, right? Like that's not the wiggle room we're talking about.
Your partner is isolating you, I will confidently say red flag.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be like, that's a deal breaker. So like, how are we gonna get you out of this situation in a way that feels right? But there are red flags that like are present in that some folks would think are red flags in Peter and my relationship, right? Like the fact that we both have on location devices for each other might be a red flag for other people, but for us it works because it means that like when he's like, hey, I'm on my way home, and then he's not there for 20 minutes, I can calm my anxiety by being like, oh, he stopped at Target. Great, good to know.
Yes,
you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
But that could be a
He's
huge
in the home
red
goods
flag.
Section.
Yes, absolutely, of course. But that could be a huge red flag in a different situation, in a different relationship. So it's like it's contextual and nuanced in a lot of different ways, in ways that like I don't think I appreciated when we started this podcast even like 4 years ago.
I totally agree. Yeah. And I think that I guess the purpose of this check-in topic is just to continue what I referenced earlier, like teaching people that it's okay to form those edges in relationships, to have those boundaries, to vocalize like, nope, I've been down this path, or this doesn't feel right to me. Just to like allow folks to lean into that even more, lean into listening to their intuition. Red flags can be 100% subjective to you and based off of your experience and your intuition. I think, if for example, somebody is like rude to waitstaff, I was always like, that's a red flag. And it is to me. It is.
Sure.
I like don't want to be with somebody who is like rude to waitstaff, but also like, were they rude to waitstaff because they, I don't know, had a bad day, or like
they were never. I'm currently on prednisone, which is why I'm thinking of this.
He's an emotional teenager. For
sure. Yeah. I'm lashing out. I don't have emotional regulation in this episode.
I shouldn't say teenager. I should say toddler.
Yes.
Not that you're a toddler. I'm saying like when I think about like emotional regulation, I think about toddlers. Anyway, or they were having a bad day, or that, or whatever. I'm not trying to make excuses for somebody who's rude to waitstaff. I literally hate that. But also, I'm wondering, I think we look to Instagram and Insta psychologists and, honest to God, like content like ours. Yeah, literally content like ours to look for hard and fast rules about human intimacy and human engagement. And that's okay. Like you said, like that often guides us. It teaches us, it gives us a language to lean back on. And also sometimes it fails us in terms of really encapsulating the nuance of humanity. A red flag for one person could just be a manifestation of your true incompatibilities with this other person. And that's enough. That's enough red flag for you. Like, oh, he can't talk about his feelings. Red flag. Sure. Or it's childhood trauma, or, it's not his love language, or whatever other weird pseudoscience we spew on this podcast, which I totally subscribe to,
Absolutely. I think we use red flags a lot as a way to like protect ourselves, but then it also becomes kind of blamey too, right? Like this idea of like, oh, you should have seen that red flag, or like, oh, I saw these red flags and I didn't do anything. Which is like, yeah, okay, cool. We have the capacity to, to do something different, like to learn and be like, okay, well, if I see that again, that's going to be something that I'm more aware of. But I think it is this idea of like, we can somehow protect our hearts by knowing all the red flags so that we can see them, and then we'll like just always say no if we see them. And like, that's not actually going to happen because our hearts are so infinitely able to be hurt in so many different ways. And like, we might be really missing out on something where we could have had a conversation, or we could have figured out what it meant for us to have some sort of boundary in a relationship with each other, right? Like, I'm thinking about that letter I think we got sent like last week or the week before with the person who like came over drunk at 3 a.m. and being like, oh, this is a huge red flag. Yeah, like, cool. If it is, great. That's fantastic. And it doesn't have to be like firmly fixed in like the list of like awful red flags. It can be like, oh, we just had a miscommunication around like how we interact with each other at 3 a.m. You know what I mean? Like, and that's really one of the things that I think that I've come to understand from doing this podcast partially, and seeing so much more of the infinite different types of experience that people have in relationships with each other, and recognizing that like my red flag might be someone else's like, meh, that's fine. We'll figure it out. We'll talk about it. We'll make it happen. Whereas I would be like, absolutely do not do that with that person. Like love bombing is a great example. Like some folks really respond well to like really intense relationships in the beginning. And like for me, that was like always a no. I was like, if it's too intense in the beginning, that means it's going to fizzle out. But like we get letters from folks who are like, we met in a whirlwind romance and it's working really well. But anyway, I need to talk about my mom. And it's like,
yes, totally.
And it's like, okay, cool. That's so great that it's working for you. 4 years ago when we started this podcast, I would have been like, shut it down. Deal breaker. It's too intense, too fast.
Shut it down. Don't want to talk about your mom. Yeah. And you know what like adds to the nuance too is that like the panicked podcast host in the back that lives in the back of my head is like, oh my God, but are Sam and I teaching folks to not listen to red flags? You know, meaning there's never enough nuance. There's never enough diversity or time to talk about the diversity of human experience.
For sure.
And yeah, I think my red flags would be firmer in the real life. Like if I was dating now, I think I would try to like listen a little bit better to my intuition, which is what I couldn't do when I was younger. But on this podcast, as we talk about other people's relationships, I think I'm a little bit more open-hearted to what's going on the other end.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Do you think you would be your red flags? Like, how would you relate to red flags if you were dating now?
I think I would be a lot less contextual about them. Like, I think I would be a lot less nuanced.
I'd be way more.
Yeah.
The pendulum swing.
I think just because it's really different to sit in front of two microphones and talk abstractly about relationships and red flags than it is to like be in the weeds of dating and like having to scroll through Tinder and like see all sorts of different things and having all these options available to you. And like, I do think that like, there are a lot of jerks out there. Like just like totally. Honest to God jerks out there that,
I might be one of them.
Yeah. Right. Like that I don't encounter as often because I'm not on dating apps. So like, it's easier for me to be like, oh, people are trying when it's like, I'm not being confronted by assholes on Tinder or Scruff or wherever it is that folks are meeting people.
I guess our biggest takeaway today from your queer aunt and uncle is like, you know, red flags are yours. They're subjective to your intuition, to your experience, and to your reading of this thing. And they can ebb and flow, and they can be malleable like boundaries are, or they can be as firm as you want them to be, as boundaries can be.
Absolutely.
Cool. Before we get into our letters, I just want to apologize to the folks at home who are listening to our episode while watching it on YouTube. If y'all don't know, we are now offering our full episodes, videos of them on YouTube. If you can find us at Just Break Up Podcast, YouTube, something. And you can subscribe. But I'm wearing, Spencer, aka Big Cat, sent me his pair of, what are these called? AirPods. Because they didn't fit his tiny ears, but they're actually too, my ears are too cavernous and elfish, and they keep falling out of my head. So like, it's the pendulum swing of ear size in the Just Break Up world. So if I'm constantly fucking with my headphones, that's why.
That's great.
So if you want to watch me fuck with my headphones and see what Sam and I look like check out our full episodes on YouTube.
Yeah, please do. I guess I just have like Goldilocks ears where my ears are perfectly designed for earbuds.
And they're filled with porridge.
Yeah,
and
honestly.
Is where I went that.
I do produce more earwax than the average person.
Oh, God. Okay, here we go. First letter is from Stressed and in Love, whose pronouns are she, her, and who is writing to us from the USA. Hello, you lovely people. As everyone says, I love listening to the podcast and greatly appreciate the thoughtfulness and effort you put into your responses. I'm not sure if you've discussed this in a specific issue on your podcast, and I'd love to hear your advice. I'm a 30-year-old heterosexual woman, she, her, in a relationship with a 29-year-old heterosexual man, he, him. We've been together for about 2.5 years and got engaged in January. Woohoo! He's lovely and kind, and I adore him. We bring out the best in each other, and I can't wait to get married and continue our life together. So here's the issue. I'm a social worker, and he's a nonprofit lawyer. Because of life and various things, we have debt, a lot of debt. We have a plan to pay it off, and both work hard to live within our means as much as we can. However, rent is expensive and life happens. We will not be able to reasonably pay it off anytime in the nearish future, unfortunately. We're planning our wedding and are keeping it small and simple. However, my fiance's parents think we should wait to get married until we don't have any debt. This is frustrating because we pay our bills on time, we pay down our debt, we don't spend meaninglessly. We also both have full-time jobs. We also live in Florida, which just became the most expensive state to live in. My fiance is in agreement that our entire lives cannot be put on hold while we pay down our debt. The reality is I may have debt for the rest of my life due to student loans. He has some debt, but fortunately no student loan debt. I feel frustrated because I feel like they don't trust us to make our own decisions. He feels frustrated because his parents' view on money gets held over him, and if he ever asks for advice or help, they never let him forget about it. My family did not view money like this at all growing up, and my parents unfortunately always have had some debt too. My fiance is supportive of my opinions, but feels like it's a tough spot with his parents. Any advice we would have would be great. Help. How can I navigate these dynamics? All right, Stressed and in Love, thank you so much for writing and for trusting us with this question. First off, congrats on getting engaged. Congrats on having a healthy relationship. That's what I should say instead of like celebrating the institution of marriage, which is not for everyone. I should just say, congrats on having a healthy relationship that you want to continue. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Also, congrats on being a human that has debt, because we know that there's a ton of debt shame out there, money shame, and yet we are constantly required to be in debt by the lovely system of capitalism and student loans. So yeah, I'm glad that you offered this question to our JBU universe, because I always jump at the opportunity to talk about money shame. It's a bitch.
It really is. And I do think it, like what Sierra said of the idea of lots of people are in debt because that's sort of the way that the system is designed. And I don't know how old your fiance's parents are, but this like sort of this transition into deeper debt is also a newer phenomenon, right? Like debt has existed for a long time and people have been in debt for longer periods of time. And like the current debt crisis that we are experiencing is of this moment, right? And it's very different than it was 20, 30 years ago around like how much debt you can carry and what's available to you without taking on debt. And so like the fact that your fiance's parents aren't understanding that like, yeah, debt is kind of a necessary evil in a lot of ways now, is deeply frustrating, because it speaks to the idea of like, it's difficult to see outside of our own experiences. Whereas you're saying like, I don't know, I went to school, like what was I supposed to do? Or I don't know what your fiance's debt is, but like, I don't know, I had to take out that credit card because it was the only thing I could afford, or I had to buy a car and so I had to get a car loan, right? Like all of those different things that might be at play that may be missing. And the reality of I I don't imagine a time in my future where I'm not going to be in debt. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's like, yeah, I've got a mortgage I got to pay off. I have car loans I have to pay off, right? Like, we're still paying off Peter's student loans. Like, that is all going to take a long time. And Peter and I are like financially fine. You know what I mean? Like, we are managing our finances acceptably and in a way that's like forward thinking, managing debt in an appropriate way. Like, and so the idea, like this weird hard and fast rule around like you can't have debt feels like just like we were talking about, feels like so like outside of context and nuance, right? Like, I don't know the type of debt that you have, but it might be debt that actually serves you, or it might be debt that's like not going to get paid off anytime soon, right? So like, it is frustrating to hear that your fiance's parents are thinking about debt in this sort of all or nothing type of way, because debt isn't all or nothing. It is very contextual. It's very nuanced, and it's unavoidable. It is like always there.
Yeah. And I think Sam is correct. They may lack the lived experience to fully understand how debt is functioning in our generation, the surrounding generations. Like, I encourage you and your fiance to, one, come to this conclusion together that I totally agree with you two. I think it is absolutely reasonable to move forward with your life because debt is a part of your life. Do I want you to continue to make those payments? Do I want you to, I don't know, liberate yourself at some point if that's in your, what am I trying to say? If that's in the realm of possibility, I want you to move forward towards that if you can. And also, like, I don't want this debt, this thing that you were kind of forced into accruing, or you made, Sam listed a bunch of reasons like why your partner might have debt. I also wanted to add, like, or he was like, financially didn't make a ton of great choices. Like, he made mistakes, like I think about debt that I accrued that I like, it wasn't good debt. It wasn't like reasonable debt. It was like dumb. Sierra was making stupid choices debt. And I think that's like valid too, and anyway, this is all to say, I think you and your partner shouldn't put your life on hold. I encourage you to, read Meg Keene's A Practical Wedding, a book that Sam and I request about like making your wedding exactly what you want it to be. And it sounds like it would align with your goals. And so once you and your partner have secured internally that this is the choice that you want to move forward with, I say you go to your parents as a unified front and just say a statement like this, share as much or as little as you want, or as much as you think will get what you want to convey across. Like, you don't have to say, this is how much debt we have. These are our payment plans. This is how long it's going to take us to pay it off. Do you want us to get married when we're 78, or whatever? You don't have to share all of that, but you could paint as clear of a picture as you want with them as to why you're not going to wait to get married. I also, I guess, just want to say, they might be afraid of you two joining your debt. Yeah. They might be, they're functioning from their own worldview, their own experience of debt before this current debt crisis. And that is going to be a limiter to them understanding your lived experience. Most importantly, of all these like spiraling things that I've said, their opinion of how you and your partner enter this new phase of your life together is not the decider. I know it's stressful. I know that it's like it's being held over your head. It feels like you are going to be disappointing them or going against their wishes. But guess what? That's totally okay. It's totally okay for you to go against these parents' wishes. We can't live a life not disappointing people, even our parents. I think that we grow up thinking that that's like the ultimate sin, disappointing our parents. But like, they have their life to live, and they're just trying to guide you and your partner in the best way that they can. And often that best way is incredibly flawed, or, as Sam said, subjective to their experience or lacking context or whatnot. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, you can say to your future in-laws, or your fiance can say to them, like, I really appreciate that this is what you're thinking, but you don't get to decide whether or not we get married, right? Like that is a choice that you two get to make in the parameters of your own relationship. Your future in-laws can decide how they want to participate in that wedding, for sure, but they don't get to decide whether or not the wedding happens. And I think that you, as you're thinking about what a wedding looks like to you and what you want it to be like as well, it is important to also consider, like, where could that money also be going to? And I do think that, like, it's often really hypocritical for folks who have, like, had weddings to be like, oh, you don't need a wedding. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I get to, but, like, you have too much debt, so you don't get to. Because my wedding was an amazing time. I loved it. I'm glad that we spent the money on doing it because it was super fun. And I also recognized that it was, like, expensive. It was something that could have been used for something else, for sure.
Yeah.
And those are just considerations that you two can take into account. But you all are the deciders of that, right? Like, you all are capable of doing it. You are able to do it. And you, at the end of the day, are the ones that get to decide sort of when you get married, what your wedding looks like. And this is one of those tricky things where it's like a moment where you have to sort of push back against the parental decision making, right? And really establish some, not necessarily hard and fast boundaries, but some edges around, like, what's in your decision making and what's in their decision making, and whether or not you're going to incorporate that into it. But it's hard, right? Like, these moments of sitting with people who have loved and cared for us in whatever way that looks like, and having to say, like, you don't actually get to decide what's going to happen in this moment is not an easy thing to do. So know that, like, even as you and your fiance are trying to figure out what that looks like, that there's no judgment around the fact that it may be more challenging than it is to just say, like, nope, you don't get to decide, right? Like, there may be other things that are at play there.
Yeah, like, if you're watching the video on YouTube, my eyebrows furrowed more and more throughout this answer, because I'm just, like, looking at the letter on my computer screen and thinking, man, like, a 30-year-old and 29-year-old, like, no. Don't wait. Don't put this wedding off because of debt. Debt is a part of life. Debt is something that you're going to tackle together as a couple. And we, as Sam and I have said, like, we know that the stress of parental wishes is a heavy burden to bear, but it's not like you're a 20-year-old being like, I'm going to marry this person that I met a week ago, which is also fine for 20-year-olds out there listening.
Uh-huh.
But, like, I would be like, maybe slow down a little. Yeah, no. Just to end this response with a confident, go get married, have fun.
In addition to not being mental health practitioners, Sierra and I are also not financial planners. So take our advice as you see fit. And
blow it.
Yeah. And I don't know, look at your balance sheets and make decisions for yourselves.
Yeah, exactly. It makes Willow so uncomfortable. Every time we get, like, a random amount of money, like a tax rebate, or, I don't know, I get a check in the mail from one of my publishers, I'm like, oh, look, $100, let's blow it. And it makes her so uncomfortable. Anyway. All right, my darling, stressed and in love. We hope that you're a little less stressed and even more in love. Thank you so much for writing.
Absolutely. We love you. All right. Our next letter comes from Anonymous, whose pronouns are she, her, who is writing from the void. Hi, Sam and Sierra. In December 2020, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. 2021 was a year full of grief, anxiety, and interspersed joy, believe it or not. I started listening to your podcast in 2019, and throughout this challenging time, your voices offered comfort and humor. My mother passed away in March of 2022. Just keep in mind that is 2 months ago. My family was with her until the very end, and it brought us all closer together. My brother and his wife, my very supportive boyfriend, and my father. Now I'm in the aftermath of the death of my mother, who I was very close with, and I have had so many loving memories of. It's tough being back at work and normalcy, but I feel a lot of support from my friends and family. While I guess it's somewhat expected that we will lose parents at some point in life, I'm 24, it's probably not as commonly expected to lose a partner. My dad was probably hit the hardest, being left alone in the house that my parents built together and seeing my mom everywhere in it. This past weekend, he told me he was seeing someone new. This woman is the sister of my mom's friend. It's worth saying that before my mom died, she had suggested some women to my dad who she thought would be a good partner for him after she was gone, and this woman was one of those potential partners. When he first told me, I was in shock. I am supportive for his happiness, but it's also been a month since my mother died, and while I'm still trying to understand the world without her, and my relationship to my dad without her, I feel somewhat alienated from him now. I feel like I need space to process this situation while also really wanting his support during this time of grief and transition. I'm also concerned that my dad is seeing someone to escape his own grieving process. When he told me about this woman, he kept on highlighting the things that the two of them have been doing together that my mom would never have liked to do with my dad, like going for drives in his sports car and having cocktails together. My mom didn't like to drink. I feel like that's something I would do after a breakup to help myself move on from my ex, to think about all the things I didn't like about that person. I told my dad I'm happy and supportive of him, which I think I am, but another part of me feels hurt and confused. I don't feel ready to see my dad with a new partner. And I don't feel like I want to talk to my dad right now while I process this. Maybe it will heal in time, but I'm wondering if you have any insight on this situation, on seeing a parent with a new partner, or on the grieving process. Thank you for providing the space for me to process this in words. Anonymous.
Anonymous, thank you so much for writing and for trusting us with this very tender, very real letter. I am so sorry for your loss, but just want to say that I see the beauty of your relationship with your mother all over this letter. The thoughtfulness and care in which you wrote it, the thoughtfulness and care in which you described your family, and the effort you're putting into understanding your father's grief, your own grief, your needs at this time. I think it's a real, a beautiful way to honor your mother. And I'm just grateful to be privy to it, I think. This letter is just, really moving. And probably the easiest point to take is like, it's absolutely okay to not be ready to see your dad with somebody else. Those feelings are okay to feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's perfectly possible to be supportive of someone and also like deeply hurt and confused by what's going on, right? Like those are two things that our minds and hearts and bodies are capable of holding, even as they feel like they're in conflict with each other. But that's one of the beautiful things about our capacity for complexity, is that like we can hold all of those things, even as we may be trying to put them in their right place or sort of like split them apart or whatever it is. So I just want to say, like, of course you're trying to be supportive of your father. Like, you love him and you want him to be happy, and you want that happiness to look like what he wants it to look like, right? It doesn't have to look like what yours does. And you are, of course, you're also feeling really hurt and confused by this, right? Like, you just lost your mom just a few months ago. And that's really fresh. That's really real. I am amazed that you are back at work, that you're even attempting to get to normalcy. Because after my dad died, that was not even an option for me for the first 3 months afterwards. I think one of the hardest parts of grief for me was that deep resistance to wanting to get back to normal. That sort of wanting to sit in the reality of, my dad is gone and I don't want to go back to work. I don't want people to move on. I want the world to stop and be like, what is this huge thing has happened? How could we possibly do anything normal? And I also have been surrounded by people whose grief looks different than mine did, right? And I'm not just talking about my family, but I'm also talking about other people who have gone through a big loss, who immediately wanted to get back to something normal, who immediately wanted to find what the next thing was, because that's how they were processing through it. And it can be really challenging, I think, to see the ways in which grief plays out in so many different ways, because it feels like it would help make more sense if everyone did it the same. Right? It would help to be like, yeah, we're all in this together, right? Like this pain that we're experiencing and the way that we're responding to it and the things that we want and the things that we need. Okay, so I can manage this, right? Because I can understand that it's part of an understood process, or that it's part of a thing that has clear parameters around how we're supposed to respond, or the right things to do, or when I can expect for this pain to finally go away. And so I really feel for you in this moment of watching you process through this grief and your own experience of it, and then also sort of seeing how your dad is responding really differently, and being hurt in the most irrational and understandable way, that it's not the same and that it's not happening in the same way, and that how deeply hurtful it is to watch other people handle grief differently than you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess like another gentle, loving reminder that your readiness for him to move on is not his readiness. And we'll also never know, like, or maybe you will know, depending on what he shares with you, like this might be just a distraction. I don't know how deep this connection is, right? I don't know what your father's readiness is to let somebody else into his life. I think that this could be his new partner. This could be a distraction. This could be a comfort. This could be a friend. This could be a coping mechanism. We won't really know what this relationship is because we're not in your father's body experiencing this deep, deep loss. I think that him doing the things with this person that your mother didn't do, isn't an indication, or, I don't know what it is, but I'm going to guess like it's not an indication of like an inauthenticity in him. It might just be him trying to connect and say, look at these joys that this woman is sharing with me. He isn't trying to replace your mother, and he's not trying to replicate exactly what she loved to do. He's sharing these things that he enjoys with this new person. So he's saying, look, I like driving in my car. I like having a cocktail. This person is sharing in the joys with me. That could be a way that he's doing it. Or like, that's just another perspective of the way to look at it. But again, like his readiness doesn't have to be your readiness, but your discomfort is absolutely yours. Like it's so reasonable that you're like, you don't feel like a safe space to bring my grief right now, Dad, because your grief doesn't look like mine. Your grief isn't acting on the right trajectory or timeline that I think it should be. I use the word right there, but we all know there's no right or wrong way. Right. But just like, I think that I just want to highlight some things that you kind of like talked around in your letter, just saying like, I don't want to talk to him right now. I don't want to hear how he's having a good time. I don't want to hear about this new relationship. I don't want to bring my sadness here because it doesn't seem like my sadness matches yours, or like there's some tension there. And that's like that's totally okay. You had like a very joyful and traumatic year, as you said, that brought you closer to your family, but you also might need space to heal in the way that you each independently need to heal. Who knows? Also, I think grief confuses roles. Your father just lost his partner and you want to caretake for him. And he's saying, no, I've like moved on to this other form of caretaking, this joy, this distraction, whatever, this connection, whatever it is. And what does that leave for you? I think it's confusing for the heart. Yeah, this is just all like very reasonable. It's very reasonable that you're feeling these conflicted feelings.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I also don't want you to like displace your own grief because you feel like it's not as connected as your dad's is, right? Like losing a parent is really challenging. It's different than losing a partner for sure, but it doesn't mean that one is better or worse than the other, right? Like it's very different.
There's no hierarchy.
Right. Because you both have lost someone very dear to you that played different roles in your life, but those were both very meaningful roles for you. And so I think that when I was going through my own grief process, right, there were people that I had to pull away from because their grief was looking different than mine, and it was really hard for me to talk about them. And now that I am further away from that grief, I'm able to look back at it and say, like, yep, I can create space in my heart for the fact that our grief processes are different, and that your experience of this person was different than mine, and so the way that it's showing up for you after they've gone is different. But I will say that in those moments, in the months afterwards, like that wasn't available to me. And I would love if it were available to you, if you could talk to your dad about this and share some of the ways in which your grief is showing up and how it's different than his, and recognizing that you're both different people having different experiences of it, and like, creating space for you both to talk about your own experiences. And it's also okay if that's not available to you, if that is not in your capacity in this moment, because this is a big loss. This is a big, hard one. And 24 is so young to lose a parent. And so I want to say, like, I do think that there is a world in which you and your dad can experience your grief in different ways and love and support each other in the differences between those grief, right? Like I absolutely believe that that's a world where that can happen. And I want to say that it's okay if that world isn't here and now. It's okay if that world is 6 months down the line. It's okay, right? There's no good way to handle grief. There's no way that it like manifests in a way that doesn't hurt, or that we don't have regrets about it, or like any of those different things. It's such a powerful and intense time. So you're not doing anything wrong by pulling away from your dad in this moment. You're not doing anything wrong by leaning even further into your dad in this moment, right? Like,
yes,
the decisions you make right now don't need to be the decisions that you make in the future, right? And you have the capacity to understand things differently, build up your reservoir of resiliency to be able to sit in complexity. And it's also okay if that reservoir is gone right now. It's okay if complexity is not a place where you can or want to be in this moment.
Yeah, it's not a time for growth. It's a time for maintenance, as your very smart therapist once told you.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I want to just reiterate again, I see you trying so much to do everything right now. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to support my father. I want him to be happy. I'm trying to make space for his grief. I'm trying to make space for my grief. Maybe just take a deep breath and say, I'm doing enough. I don't have to do any more. I don't have to be perfect right now. I am not responsible for my father's healing. You're not even responsible for him being in a healthy relationship. So this person's bringing him joy and comfort right now. You don't need to like that. You don't need to usher him into the next healthy relationship of his life. You're doing enough right now. You are enough right now. You are not in a time of growth or perfection, or even to be able to give of yourself. Right now, you should be giving back to yourself. Yeah. And Sam and I love you. We hope that this helps.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for writing.
All right. Our last and final letter, that is 2 words that mean the same thing.
Yep.
Our final, ending, last, and not first, second, but maybe last letter.
Got it.
I don't know. Is from Gloomy Gay, who is writing to us from Colorado, whose pronouns are she, her. Dear Sam and Sierra, I'm a 28-year-old queer female and finding myself having queer FOMO, or I guess I should say FEMO, fear I missed out. Let me explain. I was raised in a very strict evangelical Christian household and was homeschooled until my junior year of high school. Homosexuality was never talked about in my home growing up, ever. When I got my first job the summer after graduating high school, I ended up working at a coffee shop where several of the employees identified as LGBTQ+. For the first time, I realized that there was another way of living life than what I had been raised to believe. I really grew close to one girl in particular, let's call her Sally, and went to a gay club for the first time with her. Unfortunately, around this time, I ended up in my first relationship, which eventually became sexually abusive with a man who would often grossly fetishize lesbian relationships. Because of this experience and my upbringing, it took another few years before I even began to realize that I wasn't straight. I had never even considered that I could be anything but straight until then, thanks heteronormativity. And even after that, it took months of struggling with internalized homophobia before I realized I finally was able to accept that I was queer. Around 23, I told my sister and my closest friends that I was bisexual. I now use the label queer because I am unsure if I am actually attracted to men or was just raised to think I was. Woo! Deeply relate to that one. Just kidding. I was saying just kidding because I was just thinking about how I have such a crush on some characters on television right now who identify as men. That's all.
I want to know what those characters are.
The male lead in the second season of Bridgerton.
Oh, yeah. He's very attractive. Yeah.
He's also gay.
Yeah.
So congrats to that. But like that entire second season, the whole like gist of the season was like sexy whispering. Sexy, chaotic whispering.
It was.
He'd be like, I am a gentleman.
Yep.
And you are a lady.
Yep.
Do you know all the ways that ladies can be seduced?
He literally said that. That show is so wild. It's so...
I literally am not even that big of a fan of it, but let me tell you, it was hot that season. That sexual tension.
They had an amazing chemistry.
Amazing chemistry. And it was really from the great acting and writing, I think, of the two of them.
Oh, for sure.
He was very hot in that. Okay, so maybe if I could like take a spin on that sentence myself, it was like, am I actually attracted to men, or do I just love intensely whispering gay men?
Well,
anyway, okay, but deeply relate to that sentence, dear gloomy gay. At 24, I told the rest of my immediate family. Side note, my parents split up shortly after I graduated high school. My dad stopped going to church and thankfully evolved as a person and became much more loving and accepting. My mom, however, has gone even deeper into religion and joined what I would call a, quote, mini cult in another state. As you can guess, my mom did not love having a queer kid, so she tried to ignore it, and I let her do that to keep the peace. We existed like this for a few years before finally having a falling out last summer where it was made clear that she does not agree with me being gay and thinks it is a sin. She even threw the Bible story of Sodom and Gomorrah in my face. Nothing like hearing your mom use a Bible story that she believes is about gay people being righteously murdered to make you feel loved. Anyway, happy Pride Month, everyone. Anyway, after cutting off contact with my mom, I realized that I spent the last few years living my life very quietly in regards to my sexuality as to not ruffle any feathers. I had told myself that I just wasn't that interested in dating, but in reality, I didn't want to upset my mom or anyone else in my extended family. So here I am, about to turn 29, really only interested in dating women/femme people, but having no clue where to begin when I've only ever dated men, and I'm a little angry. I I recently watched Heartstoppers on Netflix, which I highly recommend. Sam also recommended it. Two episodes in a row. It was amazing to see such a sweet story of queer high school love. The easy acceptance from the friend group and families of the queer characters is something you don't see often. One scene in particular, where one of the characters comes out to their mom, was so sweet and loving and amazing. I absolutely loved the show, but after binging it, I found myself feeling a bit melancholy. I really wish this kind of show had been around when I was in high school. I wish I had seen such positive LGBTQ plus representation. Maybe I could have figured out my sexuality earlier. Maybe teenage me wouldn't have felt quite so out of place and invisible. Maybe I would have realized sooner that it wasn't so much that I admired Sally for my first job, but that I actually had a crush on her. Maybe I wouldn't be 28 and nervous about trying to date women. I know 28 isn't that old, but when most people are having their firsts in their teens and early 20s, it feels a little ridiculous to be having these firsts at 28 because I wasn't allowed to be anything but straight for almost all of my life. As the queen of overthinking things, I worry that any women I meet won't want to date someone who has no experience with women. I just feel like I missed out not being able to figure myself out sooner. I'm angry that my restrictive religious upbringing and my relationship with my mom limited my experiences and made me feel so disconnected from myself for so long. I'm disappointed that I didn't have a positive LGBTQ plus representation when I was younger, and I hate that now I'm feeling like I missed out. To be honest, I still feel like I'm missing out because I'm still learning how to live my life authentically when I've spent so much of it prioritizing other people's opinions and emotions. Spoiler alert, that still goes on for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
I kind of feel like I'm in limbo. I'm not hiding who I am, but not quite sure how to move forward either. I don't have many queer people in my life, and while my fierce ally of a sister is always willing to listen, I wish I could talk to someone who really understands how this feels. So I guess what I'm asking is, have either of you ever felt like this? Like you missed out, or like you wish you could have had a better representation at a younger age? I think I'm just looking for solidarity, or at the very least, support from other queer people. And don't get me wrong, I'm so glad that kids nowadays are getting shows like Heartstoppers and more general acceptance and positive representation, although we obviously still have a long way to go. But I can't seem to shake this feeling of melancholy and the fear that I missed out. How do I accept the fact that I can't go back and change anything? How do I let go of the unfairness of it all? Also, if you want to give me a nudge to put myself out there in regards to dating, I could use the encouragement.
Oh,
Thanks for taking the time to read this. Love, Gloomy Gay. Oh, Gloomy Gay. I got like a little emotional at the end of your letter. I am an emotional person in general.
sure.
But I just want to say, like, in solidarity, I got emotional because of the power of your story, because of the legitimacy of your anger and your frustration and your desires, and also because you called me your community in one way or another. And I, too, really have wrestled with my queer identity for so long. I know I'm out and proud and married to a woman and have been able to exercise my queerness in ways for longer and in ways that you haven't accessed yet. But I think it's important to shout out that, like, so many people in our community have wrestled with feeling a sense of belonging, feeling a sense of legitimacy in so many different ways. So I'm I'm so honored that you turned to us and to me. I mean, it still makes me emotional to be like, yes, this is who I am, and people know this. People know that this is who I am. Like, that's still such a powerful thing to me. Mm-hmm. And also, I'm so grateful to answer this letter so that we can call in more feelings and more legitimacy of people's identity and their authenticity. Yeah, this is just powerful to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's it's an honor to be considered part of your community. Like it's I think that it's wonderful for me to think about this podcast as being a place where queer people come to understand themselves and each other better. And recognizing, of course, that Sierra and I have like particular points of view on queerness given our identities and our lived experiences. But it is really wonderful to think that there are places where folks are finding community with us in this. And recognizing the fact that like all of the things that you've talked about in terms of sort of compulsory heterosexuality, compulsory sexuality in general, compulsory, or implied or understood or assumed like cisgenderness is also like part of this, really do fuck us up in so many ways, because it does deny us the experience of being able to understand ourselves at a young age. And to be clear, like those compulsory stuff also impact people who aren't queer too, right? Like the ways in which those things are assumed or enforced are really damaging in a lot of ways. And I want to just say that like, I'm really sorry that you experienced that in such a heightened way, given your family of origin and like all of the different sort of religious and social expectations that were put on you. And I want to say this not in a way to dismiss what you're feeling, but to invite you into this broader community to say, like, I think that there are a lot of folks who are struggling with really similar things in this moment, right? Like you're not uniquely fucked up about this sort of compulsory heterosexuality. Yes. And I think it deeply impacts lots of queer people, including myself, to this day.
Yes.
Which is not to say like your feelings don't matter, because they absolutely do. And your case is unique to you and is nothing like my experience in a lot of different ways. But I do want to say like, I want to say this in a way to say like, you're not a misfit, right? Like you're not a fucked up toy, right? You are a person who has been experiencing this at the same time that a lot of folks have been experiencing this too. And so you talking about this, understanding this deeply about yourself, you bringing this into queer spaces, isn't going to like puncture the perfect bubble of queerness that you might be thinking that we're all operating under, right? Like I've been a professional queer since I was like 24 years old, right? Like it has in so many ways been my job to be queer. And
I've been a queer hobbyist.
In more ways than one, you know what I mean? And it is still something that I am struggling with. My own identity still continues to unfold before me. And there are still like those moments where you're like, Sierra laughed about this, but like, I don't know if I'm attracted to men or if I have just been socialized to be attracted to men. I resonated with that. I am attracted to men, unfortunately, but like there were so many different aspects of it where I was like, yeah, there's so much about my understanding of my identity where I am literally like, am I that? Or did someone just tell me I was that and I didn't know anything else? And so like,
oh my God, do I like the guy from Bridgerton because he's like domineering and I've been taught that like I'm submissive my whole life, like that I want somebody to tell me what to do and like, oh my God. No idea. Am I a product of my cultural conditioning, or is this a real little boner that I
have? So that's all to say. This is absolutely hard. This fear of missing out is so legit and is so real and so valid. And I want to invite you into the reality of we are all of us figuring this thing out as we go along. We may look like in so many ways that we've got it together, that we've got it figured out. I don't.
That we know ourselves.
Yeah, I don't. I know myself better than I did when I was 18 years old, for sure. And there's still stuff that is continuing to unfold in front of me. And so I say this also to other queer people who have been out for a while and who may be like very sort of also sort of solidified in communities as well, to some of the amazing introspection that Gloomy Gay is doing in this moment as well, right? Like we are never 100% fully aware of who we are as people. There are always things to learn and unfold. And so I believe, Gloomy Gay, that the level of introspection, the level of self-awareness, the level of questioning that you're bringing into your understanding of your queerness is a beautiful thing, even as it is really fucking you up, right? Like even as it is causing you a lot of like consternation and a lot of concern. And I would love to see that level of questioning and that level of interrogation like continue with a lot of the queer people that I'm around. And in fact, I see it with a lot of the queer people I'm around, even if they've been out since they were 14 years old or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I also want to just offer a couple different ways to look at a couple things you said. Of course, prioritizing, just affirming that this is real, that heteronormativity does fuck us up, right? Like does require a certain amount of lifelong detangling. That's what we're signing up for, really. Mm-hmm. That's what these institutions of power do to us, right? And also here are a couple different perspectives for you. You had a whole paragraph in your letter that was like, maybe this would happen, or maybe this, what if I had more representation when I was younger? Maybe this would have happened. So when you find yourself going on those thought processes, I want you to just have like a moment of radical acceptance and a radical honesty with yourself, not to say I accept that this is what happened to me, but to accept what your thought process is doing. Say, I accept that I am going down a path of what ifs, of maybes, and I accept that that's what my brain is doing. I'm wondering about what could happen. I'm going to state that out loud to myself and accept that I'm wondering about the what ifs. And the reason why I want you to do that is because what ifs and maybes is never going to result in clarity or change, right? So I just want you to accept that wandering that your brain does is okay. It's okay to do it, but that's the end result, is you're not going to have change. You're not going to have clarity just saying, well, what if this happened, or maybe this happened? Because that's not the path to change, right? We can't change the past. We can't, there's not going to be a lot of clarity going in circles in the past about like maybe we could have gone down this route or whatnot. It's okay to do that. Our brains naturally do that, but just tell yourself, I'm doing this, but I know that this isn't going to change anything. And then I also want to offer you one other perspective about those what ifs and maybes. Like, sure, maybe affirming, of course, this was wildly damaging and you have every right to be angry, number one. But sure, maybe with more queer representation in your youth, you would have come to your queerness early. But also, like, maybe your mom would have seen you watching some queer representation online and then, said something terribly damaging and homophobic and painful, and then you closeted yourself for an extra 10 years because you were more malleable at a 14-year-old to think like, oh my God, I am going to hell. I am a sinner, right? Like, sure. Maybe if you had this representation earlier, you would have buried it even deeper, right? But going back to my first point, this is all hypothetical. There's no clarity here. There's no change here. I'm just painting another picture that like you see that the lack of representation in your youth led you here, and you see that as a bad path. And yes, it was damaging, but maybe it would be even more damaging in a different reality. Not saying that we don't need that representation, we do, but you're doing this cyclical thinking of like, this path hurt me. Well, maybe this path saved you. Maybe this path saved you from going to fucking conversion therapy, right? Maybe this path, I don't know. I'm spiraling, but that's also what happens when we look for the past to change, look for the past to be something different than it wasn't. Again, for like the 80th time, I'm going to affirm that your anger and your feelings and your resentment of this time is totally valid. Just offering a different perspective. The other last perspective that I wanted to offer was about, dating women and your fear that maybe your lack of experience will be a turnoff. Well, guess what? And this is as someone who struggled with similar feelings of validity and fear that I would be rejected for my particular brand of queerness and how it showed up or didn't show up in my life. If they want you to have more experience, then that person is not for you. They sound like a dick. They sound like somebody who doesn't understand how hard it can be to come out in a heteronormative culture, especially in a family that raised you to feel the way you did about yourself. If they don't have compassion for that, if they want you to instead be something totally different from who you are, then I don't want you to date them. They sound like a dick. And so again, just another way to look at this is say, I'm here. This is what I have to offer. This is who I am. This is the holy and broken path that brought me to myself right now. And I'm going to walk it for the rest of my life. And I'm going to be lost and confused and seeking clarity about myself for the rest of my life. But if they don't want me on this path, they are not worthy of walking it with me.
That's right.
This person is not for you. So hopefully that brings you some clarity that you're not lacking. You have every right to feel frustrated because we live in a hurtful way towards people like us, right? Community members like us. We hurt them every day by denying their existence. And also you don't deny yourself anymore. This is who you are. This is the path that brought you to where you are. And you have a lot to offer people right now, as is. You're not behind. You're not ahead. There is no way in which you are failing in this moment.
Absolutely. Thinking about the unfairness of it all is really challenging, right? And that's not necessarily even something that I need you to let go of, right? You sort of ask that question of how do I let go of the unfairness of it all? It's deeply unfair. And how you motivate yourself in that unfairness is up to you, right? But I think part of my own experience of my identity is also recognizing the fact that my identity has been shaped by this unfairness. And my identity is beautiful and wonderful, and I love it. It is so wholly a part of me, and I am so deeply proud of it. And it was shaped by these experiences that I had that have led me to become this type of person that I am. And so, yeah, it was deeply unfair that I had to experience so many of those different things. And I'm really grateful for that unfairness because it has shaped me into a person that I am excited to be.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
I don't want it to happen, right? To be clear, I'm not saying yeah, queer kids, you should have to face the things that I do. Absolutely not. And I also recognize that the things that I have been through have led me to this moment, that have offered me this opportunity to have so much more compassion and understanding and appreciation for what folks are going through. And that I will never fully know those things because I have experienced this level of feeling so much like a misfit outsider, of being something's not right here and I don't know how to put my finger on it. And so the unfairness is stupid and it shouldn't exist, right? The all of this homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, all of this stuff is so stupid. And it's also deeply part of us and our experiences. So I don't know what to do with all of the unfairness, and I don't know what to do with the melancholy necessarily, even of recognizing I put up with a lot of shit for a lot of time because I didn't know what else to do. But to also practice that radical self-acceptance and that radical self-love and say it wasn't a good thing. I'm not necessarily thankful for it. And it's deeply a part of me. And so to love myself, to fully understand my own experiences is to fully embrace that complexity, is to fully say yep, this is what has led me to this moment. And now I have the opportunity to do different things with all of those different situations and experiences that life has afforded me. So put yourself out there. That's what I'm going to say. That's the final thing. You want some encouragement. Put yourself out there. You're not uniquely fucked up in this experience. And there are people out there who are going to deeply understand and resonate with what your experience has been and the place where you are in this moment. And and I hope that you find those people, because I know that they are out there for you.
Absolutely. We love you so much. Happy Pride Month. This month and all other months of the year are yours.
Absolutely. All of them.
Yeah. And more, even more in like other dimensions. I don't know what I'm saying.
Everyone needs to stop watching Heartstopper because it's really fucking people up.
Is it emotional? It's just like making people feel lots of feelings.
Oh, all sorts of feelings.
Well, I think, okay, one more thing. The melancholy is so real. Like, melancholy, I think, is not necessarily a bad emotion. It's an uncomfortable one.
Yeah.
And we think we need to put an action behind discomfort. And sometimes we just have to sit in it. Sometimes I feel melancholic about the past. I feel melancholic about choices that I might have made in my life, or choices that were made for me that have limited or changed my path forever. And it's okay to mourn that.
Yeah.
It's okay to sit in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you're right. Like, we don't have to do anything about it, right? We can just say like, oh, yeah, I really do wish that was different. Or, oh, I wish that my parents had responded in the way that they did on that show. Or I wish that I had friends who had been able to talk to me about this. And it's really sad. It's really sad that I didn't have that, right?
Yeah.
And then, like, that's sort of like the end of the...
Or do the inner child work and say, like, my inner child is sad that I was denied that acceptance and comfort. So then you have to say to your inner child what your mother was unable to say to you, was incapable of accessing.
Yep.
You need to give yourself what your parents never gave you. Total love, total gentleness, tenderness, comfort, celebration. I celebrate myself. I am so proud of myself for being who I am, for being brave enough to love myself, to being brave enough to love myself enough to allow myself to be who I am authentically. And I'm going to do everything that I wanted my parents to do. Throw a coming out party, hug myself, like hold myself gently, buy myself a present because I'm so proud of myself. Like go get myself a fucking cake, like do the things. I'm trying to think of like the things my mother did to celebrate me, or I wanted her to do, And a lot of it was just verbal affirmation of like, I'm so proud of you. So say that to yourself, Gloomy Gay. Parent yourself, because your mother failed. You're right. She did fail.
She did.
And so now we can take it upon ourselves. I'm so proud of you. I love you. I love you exactly the way you are.
Absolutely. And how amazing and impressive it is that you came into this understanding of yourself despite the odds, right? Despite the fact that you had so many people telling you who you weren't and that who you were was not good or bad, and yet you still found yourself. Like, it's just amazing. It's so impressive to me that in those circumstances, given what you were dealt, you still found the place to ask questions, right? You still found the place to say like, this isn't working. This isn't fitting for me. And I just think that that's so amazing and beautiful, even as it's deeply challenging, and even as it's so unfortunate that that's the way that we live in this moment. But I'm proud of you. I'm impressed with your willingness to stick with this, right? With your willingness to try, totally. And I hope that you are able to offer yourself that a level of pride as well, especially in this Pride Month that we're currently in.
I know. I was just going to say, I love this conversation. And we love you, Gloomy Gay. We hope you're a little less gloomy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for writing.
This brings us to the blind date segment of our episode. Every show we like to shout out something that we love, that we want to set you up with. And this week we are sending you home with
a book called Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI by David Grann. This is a book about an experience that I had no idea existed, about Osage natives who lived in or were sort of forcibly moved into Oklahoma, and then found out that they had all of this oil in the land that they were moved towards, and so became very, very rich. And of course, all sorts of like awful racism played out, and their money was taken from them. And it tells the story of somebody who actually started like murdering all of them in order to get their money, and how that sort of helped shape the story of the FBI, who was called in to investigate because it was happening on tribal land. And what's great about it is that it sort of tells that story in a really interesting way by focusing on the people who were most impacted by it, as well as some of the investigation. But it also is about the author going back and sort of recognizing that like even the story we've been told about how the FBI has solved this case isn't actually true to the experience of the people who lived through it. And so it was like a very interesting book to read because it not only offered this story that I didn't know and that I wasn't aware of, but also sort of walked through the ways in which we talk about it, and dismantled some of it in a really meaningful way to say like, even our understanding of how the FBI came in and sort of solved these horrific murders on behalf of these Native folks is not right. And that they didn't actually do that well, and that it actually caused a lot of harm that may or may not have been intended. So I just thought it was a really interesting book. Would encourage folks to check it out. Again, it is called Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI by David Grann.
Awesome.
All right, everyone, thank you so much for listening. You can like us on Facebook, and you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at JustBreakUpPod.
You can slide into our DMs, send us your favorite relationship memes, but most importantly, you can submit your questions about all matters of the heart at justbreakuppod.com, which is also where you can find our merchandise.
Please remember to follow and subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, and consider supporting us on Patreon. If you support us on Patreon for as little as $5 a month, you'll get an additional bonus weekly episode, both audio and a video recording of it, if that's of interest to you, as well as a number of other perks at different levels. That's patreon.com/justbreakuppod. This literally keeps our mics on and helps us reach more brokenhearted souls who need two random strangers giving them relationship advice.
Just Break Up is a production of Duvid Media, original music, recording, editing, producing, all magical things by our good friend Spencer Wirth-Davis, aka Big Cats. Make sure to check out his podcast, Finding Quantum Quest. And remember, in this Pride Month, whether you are out or not, whether you are celebrated by your community or your loved ones or shunned, whether you are able to act on your queerness, whether you've been in a relationship or not, whether you're in a straight presenting relationship or not, you are queer enough, and we celebrate you. And if all else fails,
just break up.